einrichten.
Okay, greetings everybody. Welcome to this series of the Black Community Coalition of Justice and Self-Defense, our Academy lecture series. And today we have Gerald Perriera from Guyana, who is going to deal with the topic of the role of religion in the struggle for total African emancipation.
Yeah, we welcome you, Brother Gerald.
Yep, thank you.
And we would have like two parts. One is your lecture.
Yep.
Please let us know if participants have questions. Should they be allowed to ask direct questions by raising their hands, or you just want to finish and we have our discussion afterwards? I mean,
yes, we can have the discussion afterwards.
Okay. So for everybody to understand,
yes,
if you have questions, notice them down or write them in the chat, and then so they won't get lost, so we can discuss them afterwards without Facebook Live direct streaming. Yeah, okay. So we're looking forward to your findings on what about religion interconnected to the emancipation. Yeah.
Yeah, and before we start, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah. But I'm Gerald Perriera from Guyana. I have been a political activist since I was 16 years of age, and this year I'm headed to 68. So I have decades of consistent political activism and being in organizations, and whichever part of the world I resided, I made sure that I participated in the struggle for social change and for the liberation and total emancipation of African people. My areas of training, I did political science, transpersonal psychology, as well as theology, because my interest in theology, especially Black liberation theology, developed at a particular time. I always had the interest, but I took it on, I focused intensively on it after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc and the change in Africa, the so-called African Marxist regimes, when they abandoned their programs and went towards neoliberalism and so on. So I went back to the drawing board and I did tremendous work and research to arrive at the truth, at the conclusion of where we went wrong. And that is what I want to address today. So can I go ahead now?
Yes, please.
Last but not least, I'm also the chairperson of the Organization for the Victory of the People, a political formation in Guyana. We contested 2 elections at the regional level. We are not primarily an electoral outfit. We just contested elections as a way of getting our message out, to reaching out to the people, because we understand the futility and the Western parliamentary model, or the liberal democratic arrangement. The liberal democratic arrangement has really done nothing for our people, right? All it has done throughout this part of the world, and it's the same thing in Africa, is rearrange it in terms of what we have now. We can refer to as neo-colonial regimes. Regimes that primarily serve white supremacy and Western capital. So I'll go ahead now. Hello?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. A very interesting phenomenon occurred when the former Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc collapsed. Why I'm identifying this was because many countries of the global South, especially in Africa, like you had in Ethiopia under Mengistu, you had Denis Sassou Nguesso in Congo, Brazzaville, Angola, Mozambique under Samora Machel, but he died before the collapse. You had Frelimo party in Mozambique, the MPLA in Angola, many more political formations that were influenced by Marxism, Leninism. And these regimes proclaimed themselves Marxist-Leninists. And what they were doing was applying an ideology, a political philosophy, an entire way of looking at the world they were looking at it through the lens of others. They're looking at their own situation. They were looking at Africa through the lens of an ideology that had its roots in the European historical experience and European culture, because ideologies are products of culture and religions too emerge out of a particular culture. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, all of these regimes that proclaimed themselves Marxist-Leninists, they were at a loss. They abandoned this, they abandoned their ideological program and they turned to free market capitalism. They abandoned one European ideology for another European ideology. And today, we're seeing that what you see in Africa and also in South America and in the Caribbean is that all of those that have adopted this neoliberal ideology, another European ideology, we are seeing that what it is doing is concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. We are seeing the breakdown of the family, social chaos, crime, selfishness, and all of that, because this ideology, this neoliberal ideology, it's an attempt to reshape or to reconstruct the human person. All the things, all the virtues that all religions speak of: compassion, love, caring, sharing, and those virtues, those things, neoliberal capitalist ideology treat those things as idealistic non-realities, and that you should focus on yourself. So in other words, greed is good. Focus on the individual and your own self and you'll get by. And this is what is going on. So when you look at it, they have abandoned one ideology for this. But the thing with the communist ideology or the Marxists is that they believed in all of these things, caring and sharing and all of that. But the contradiction with the Marxist ideology was that while they were affirming these perennial truths, these divine truths or principles, their very ideology stood in opposition to it. Because the Marxists, like the capitalists, believe that the human being, the human person, is really an economic and material being. And if you satisfy their economic and material needs, then you will have a happy society. Wrong. The human person has spiritual needs too that must be addressed. And this is where they went wrong. So getting back to this now, I want to say something first about the religion. Because, for example, when we're going to talk about our total emancipation, and that can only come about through a revolution. And that revolution is a process and it goes through stages. But when you speak about revolution and religion, or religion and revolution, the first thing that comes to people's mind, they say, well, this is a contradiction. Because the left, you know, many people who are anti-imperialists and anti-capitalists, the white left, and sadly a lot of our brothers and sisters who constitute the black left, they see, and not all, but there's a lot who call themselves communists or so. see religion and revolution as a contradiction because of what happened in Europe. Again, because the excesses of the church was so corrupt. And the church, when Marx said that religion is the opiate or the opium of the people, he was observing something in European society where the church was part of the oppressive social arrangement. And he saw religion as something that is an obstacle to the working people or the proletariat achieving their emancipation. Now, the thing about that is Marx was very limited because he was looking at religion within the European context. But scholars have agreed. In fact, it is difficult, for scholars to agree on what constitutes religion. There've been no proper definition. And that is primarily because non-Western cultures did not separate everyday life from what is referred to as the sacred. Because of the excesses and the corruption of the church and the way religion was hijacked and used to reinforce the oppressive feudal order, the rebelling classes, the rising pet bourgeois class at the time, during what is referred to as the European Enlightenment, and we call it the so-called Enlightenment. Good. And the reason we call it the so-called Enlightenment is because all the philosophers of that period were very racist and saw Europe as the center of everything. And they all considered the African as outside of history or a subhuman. So what they did was to toss out the baby with the bathwater. But we have to go back and as Africans to recapture what religion is all about. Because the way religion was not meant to be something separate, something that focused on the sacred as opposed to the secular or the mundane things. No, religion was seen as a totality. The way we organize our economy, the way we related to our fellow human beings, to our neighbors, the way we organize our economy was all part of religion. It was considered all part of the sacred. There was no division between the sacred and what the Western world referred to as secular. And that is why we've seen this in Yoruba, in the Yoruba tradition, in Yoruba theology. It's also in the Islamic tradition, because the Islam itself never defined itself as religion. It defined itself as deen, a way of life. Even the Hindu tradition, what people refer to as Hinduism, which is really dharma or a way of life, they're all these faiths these confessions that I just named are at the core African. And why I'm saying this is because if we are, as Africans, we are going to fight and engage in the struggle for total emancipation, then we have to start on the premise, as Nkrumah pointed out in his book, Consciencism, that Islam, Christianity, and what is referred to as traditional African religion are all products of Africa, not of the Middle East. And it is a historical error for those who identify, for example, Islam or Christianity with Europe or with the Arabs. In fact, the early Islamic tradition was African, very African. But then, of course, there was all what happened to Islam and to Christianity and Judaism was the whitening of the religion at a particular period. So we have to recapture our religion. We have to focus on theologies of liberation that are at the core of all of our religions and faith. This is important because the struggle for our emancipation is a process. And we have to see religion, we have to move away from seeing religion as an obstacle. Of course, there is a struggle. There is this struggle between true religion and false religion. What am I talking about? Because when you examine every religion that emerged out of the African homeland, and even in India, where the Dalit people will tell you that they have their origin and links to Africa, there was no mention of any priestly caste or any clergy or representatives of God standing between the human person and the divine. That arose at a particular time with the division of labor in society. So those who there were those who spent their time planting crops, those who were looking at the cattle, and those who focus on the rituals, the elaborate rituals, customs, as well as the revealed word, depending on the text, the various faiths, sorry. So you had this priestly caste emerging. And very often this priestly caste became part of the ruling elites. So when there was rebellion against the elites, the priestly caste was there to provide some sort of theological and religious justification why those who were uprising, those who were rebelling should stay at their station, and why those with political power should remain where they are. It happened all across the board. It happened in Islam. It happened in Islam where there were usurpers and hijackers. It happened in Christianity, because in every religion, there was a period when those who were opposed to the truths stood directly in hostility to those religions. They persecuted the believers, they persecuted the prophets. But then, when they realized that they could no longer carry out open persecution, what they did, they entered into these faiths, hijacked them, distorted the message. So we have the struggle going on today. We have the struggle which has been going on for centuries between falsehood and truth, or between true religion and false religion. And people tell you, well, look, many people, millions have died in the name of God or in the name of religion. Yes, because that type of false religion is the religion that went out to conquer. That's the type of religion that wanted to subjugate people. That is the type of religion that wanted to keep you in your so-called station in life. And we have to get this clear, that as Africans, as a spiritual people, in every religion, which as I think it was Michel Aflaq who said that, and Kwame Ture often was good at making that point consistently, is that all the monotheistic faiths came out of Africa, everyone. And what we have to address is that we have millions of Africans who are Christians, millions of Africans who are Muslims. We have Africans who are Hebrew. We have Africans who we refer to as, a term I don't like, traditional African religion, because I think all of the religions that I mentioned here are traditional to Africa or indigenous to Africa. And I believe that. But what we have to do is to capture the liberation theologies that focus on our emancipation, because this is at the core of those faiths. That is what we have to capture. Today, if we look around, we have a religion. We're seeing religions, we're seeing theologies that Marx rightfully, with all his limitations, referred to as opiate to the people, though he didn't have the total picture. I have noticed when you look, I've seen programs in Africa where there are a lot of pastors preaching this feel-good type of religion, this so-called prosperity theology that doesn't address structural injustices and see oppression and exploitation as products of structural arrangement, but rather as something to do personally or primarily with the individual. And you have them in Africa, you have them in the United States. I give examples of them. You have the likes of T.D. Jakes and many others. What they do, they preach a false theology. They address the human person as an individual. They condemn sin, individual sin. They see sin as something personal. But when it comes to condemning institutional sins that Martin Luther King addressed, they're silent on that. Unemployment, crime, and all of these social ills are seen or are deconstructed or reduced to a personal level. They're never seen or conceptualized in a very holistic manner. Never. And that is why Martin Luther King said that a religion that does not address these social issues and speak and address these injustices is a dry as dust religion that is no good for our people. So we're clear about that. So what we are witnessing, and it's the same thing with Islam. If we look in Africa today, we are seeing groups that are linked to Al-Qaeda, linked to ISIS, groups in Africa, such as ISIL in Africa, Boko Haram, the Islamic State in the Maghreb, Islamic State in West Africa, and all of these heretical groups that are there primarily serving imperial powers and serving those with an agenda that is primarily aimed at keeping Africa exactly where it is and not leading to the freeing of the continent, the unification of Africa, and the emancipation of our people, both at home and abroad. And it is those of us as Pan-Africanists, those of us as African revolutionaries who are involved in this struggle for the total emancipation of our people must understand that, one, that to achieve this total liberation, it will come with what John Henry Clark or Franz Fanon referred to as the African World Revolution, the World African Revolution. And this revolution must be seen as a totality. It's something total. This revolution, our conception of revolution, has a political, social, cultural, ethical, and last but not least, the spiritual aspect or the spiritual revolution. Because if we want to change the structures, changing structures, and this is where all the revolutions or the revolutionary tradition that emerged out of the European so-called Enlightenment and produced all of these European ideologies of neoclassicism, Marxism, liberalism, and communism went wrong. They focus on man as a social being without understanding man as a spiritual being. Man is a social being, but he's also a spiritual being. And the European tradition, intellectual and epistemological tradition, is so one-dimensional that it only focuses on one aspect of the human person. So they reduce man to an economic being and a material being. So our people as Africans struggling, as I said, the revolution we are talking about will understand that the spiritual revolution must be at the core of this social revolution, that is spiritual revolution, because while we are transforming the world, we have to be transforming ourselves qualitatively. We cannot speak and condemn oppressors and oppressive institutions, and when we take office or when we acquire power, we do exactly the same like those who we have removed. No, we have to be qualitatively different. And that has to achieve that, we have to address it at the level of the spiritual, an authentic spirituality, a spirituality of struggle and a spirituality of liberation. That is what, and all religions have that. And what we have to do as Africans, whether we are Muslims, whether we are Christians, whether we are Hebrew, or adherents of Yoruba, right? In all of those religions that I've just identified, we have the liberation theologies, and we have to use them, those liberation theologies. We have to understand them and see how important they are in advancing our struggle. We've had the liberation theology in Latin America, which was advanced by Gustavo Gutierrez. And then we had the Black liberation theology of James Cone. And James Cone did tremendous work, the late James Cone, because the Latin American liberation theology, as much as it achieved a lot, and we support and agree a lot with it, its emphasis on the racial dimension was very minimal. It emphasized, borrowing from the Marxist tradition, borrowing from Marxism as a tool of analysis, it overemphasized the role of class and negated tremendously the race issue. Because Africans are oppressed in South America, not only because of their ethnicity, their skin color, they're also oppressed by class too. But many, the Marxists and many who have used Marxism as a tool of social analysis believe that when you bring about the new revolution and you abolish class, then the race issue will fall in place. Not so, not so. So while we acknowledge class and race as powerful dynamics, we as Africans know when one moves to the front burner or when it goes to the back. So we're always conscious of the issue of race. And that's why we find many, even in the Latin American progressive, many Latin American communists, many Latin American Marxists and leftists are quite racist in their orientation. So as Africans, we are our own liberators, and we have to look to our own culture. Our liberation and the ideas for our liberation, we have to revisit our cultures. We have to look at our own religions and the theologies of liberation that is at the center of them. We need to see emancipation as a process. That was a mistake in the Caribbean. We believe that many of our people believe, and the scholars did a lot of damage, contributed to that, that liberation, emancipation meant, well, the chains were removed and we walked off and we were free. Nope. In the Caribbean, it's just a new plantation. The social relations are exactly the same like on the plantation, just the skin color of the overseers are different. But the revolution we are talking about that will usher in, that will lead to this total emancipation, is completely different to the revolution that the liberals speak about, that came out in the liberal tradition in Europe and what shaped the French Revolution or Marxist revolutions. Because those revolutions that I just mentioned, they want to create something out of nothing. They seek to destroy the past and to nullify the past. Africans we want to revisit, we want to reclaim what is authentic and move forward with it. That's the difference. And most the Africans are a very, very spiritual. We are a very spiritual people. In African culture, sharing, compassion, cooperation is at the core of our cultures. African societies were organized in such a way as to cater, as to foster those values and to reinforce them of cooperation, sharing, and all of that. But with the European incursion into Africa and with colonialism, the disrupted African society, the arrested development of Africa, and the imposition of the European models of organizations and of arranging their society. So while the African, the collective was seen as a human convergence, while the Europeans saw the collective as a technical organization. And many Africans are operating at this level. Instead of going back and revisiting and seeing our collective as a human convergence and a space for all to express themselves and to have a say in the decisions that affect their life, we have subscribed. We are using the European model of organization, which is seen as something technical. And this is one, not primarily, but one of the reasons for the alienation of the African masses in the motherland and in diaspora. So this revolution I'm talking about will be the revolution that at the social level and political level will dislodge the power elites and recapture power, remove power from the center and disperse it. That is where it belongs. We had it in traditional African societies, the Kebele system. We had it it existed in Congo civilization, where the people in the villages, the people in what you want in the small tribes, because I'm not comfortable with the word tribes. I like to talk about nations because, you know, we're much larger than tribes. And we had that. We had consensus democracy. We participated. In fact, if we look at the democratic tradition, really, we will see that the democratic tradition never emerged. It didn't come out of Greece. Greece actually stole the concept of democracy from Africa. The democratic tradition was alive and well in African societies. So these are things that we have to look at instead of just dismissing it. And religion is not. False religion is the opiate of the people. False theology is the opiate of the people. But the religions that we have, the religions that are emancipatory, liberatory, that is what we are taking forward in this struggle for total emancipation. Sekou Touré wrote an excellent piece. He addressed the issue of revolution, religion and revolution for transformation. And Sekou Touré was very critical of all of those who were tailing the Soviet Union and the Western left and the Eastern Bloc countries. He said, look, the majority of our people are Muslims. How can we preach an ideology that at the core of it is atheistic and materialistic? He said, we can't do that. He said, we have to look at our religion, all African religions, as revolutionary because at the core, we see it. That it is there, and that is what we have to reclaim. So we don't see a contradiction between religion and revolution. We see them as being complementary because religion speaks about brotherhood and sisterhood. It speaks about compassion. It's about wanting for others what you want for yourself. It's about the equitable distribution of resources. It's anti-elitist. It's about the human dignity and equality of every human person in the eyes of the transcendental, right? And revolution believes in the same thing. So they're complementary. So when we speak about revolution here, we're not talking about revolution as defined in the liberal or the Marxist or communist and all these European definitions. We're speaking about revolution from an Afrocentric Pan-Africanist position. a revolution that will dismantle the oppressive structures in Africa and in the diaspora where people are suffering, a revolution that will move forward, that will uplift ourselves spiritually and morally, a revolution that will emphasize that each and every one of us are a brother's keeper. We didn't have to wait for the Gospels to tell us. The Gospel were recent. The Gospel that came from the African tradition, because I said all came out. All of these religions, all of the monotheistic faiths are African religions. They're African religion. Islam is not an Arab religion. Christianity is not a religion of Europe. In fact, and I need to mention this here because it's important, there's a lot of research done by Dr. Wesley Muhammad, who is a Near Eastern scholar, master of the languages and so. Because one of the points he made and the deep research that we found was that the original Arabs were Africans. The original Arabs were Africans. The white Arabs were people who came from an area, came into those communities and they mixed, they accepted the religion. So what really happened at the time was in the early periods of the Abbasids, those Muslims who led were all Africans. And then there was the period where those who came from Persia who accepted Islam started the whitening of it. And those are the hijackers and the usurpers, and we have them in every religion, because they're there to maintain falsehood. That's their rule. And it's a struggle that we have to wage, and we have to wage it relentlessly. A religion for liberation. And those who are preaching this feel-good religion, this religion where they fly, they're preaching, and you see the flag of the United States, the flag of the oppressors flying inside the church. You look at many of them in the United States, some of these Negro preachers, not African preachers. They don't come in the tradition of Reverend Jeremiah Wright or Albert Cleage, who wrote The Black Messiah and Black Christian Nationalism, or James Cone, or Josiah Young, who wrote Gaylord Wilmore, who wrote books on Black liberation theology. These are people who are just black faces of white theological supremacy. And those are the people who are preaching a religion that is submissive, a religion that is meant to keep our people in their place. And that is the religion that we have to resist. That is the religion that we have to struggle against. But like the white left, we can't dismiss religion, because that is not what we as Pan-Africanists want, and we could never do. The white left has its own struggles, because the mistake they made was to allow the white right to hijack religion. And the white right preach a false doctrine, are preaching false theologies. So instead of the progressive white left confronting them and contesting the grounds, they've left it to the right. But as we, as Black people, as Africans, we cannot leave that to anyone. That is our right, that is our struggle, and we have to claim that, and we have to move forward with that. So this process of total emancipation will only come about and can only be achieved not by focusing on primarily on the political and social, but it has to be rooted too in the educational aspect of the revolution, which goes hand in hand with with what I'm talking about, as well as the spiritual dimension. That is what we have to focus on. And religion, our religions, our ancestors, faith, whether it was in the Yoruba religion, whether it was in Islam, whether it was in the when the Ethiopians fought against the Italians, that fate was there. They were guided by that religion of liberation, by those theologies of liberation in resisting the oppressor. And that's what we have to reclaim today. That is what we have to concentrate on, and that is what we have to address. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Gerald, for this very powerful input. It was, for me, it was especially insightful that you sort of characterize the ideologies of European monotheistic imperial religions, how you have been saying it.
Yeah.
And for me, religion has or is till today not really defined what exactly is religion all about, for there are so many different things. But what I could see is that there are two things that make quite a big of a difference. One is the spirituality that is everywhere in every religion. And on the other side, we have dogmatism. That is like saying, this is the one and only, and you have to do it this and that way. And that is also the ground of these imperial religions like Islam and Christianity. And they have had the power to overthrow spirituality by dogmatism. And this is, for me, to understand the essence of what you have been saying. And I also see that there are different modes, different centers of this spirituality. One is holistic, cosmologic, universe. So even the godliness is part of this universe rather than God, the incarnation of the universe. So human beings are also part of the universe. The second is the ancestry, to have the idea. And this is the point where, like, Christianity and Islam are trying to fight African traditional religions by denying the principle of the ancestry, in a way that this is part of the cosmologic order. Connected to that, also the question of seniority, so that, so to say, the elder the people are, the concept is focused on the age or on the experience of the people rather than on their gender, for instance. And last not least, now I lost the point. It's the way of the oral tradition, to have interpretation that is standing against the dogmatism that anybody who is involved in traditional religion and is taking it seriously as one of the priests or contributors is a person that is putting experience into life derived from historic and traditional meanings, So this is a difference to the dogmatism we see with all these imperial religions. So my question now, apart from saying it as a revolution.
Yeah.
How to really use these tools we have actually there to overcome the dogmatism by any means. It doesn't need to be a religion in itself. If we say liberalism, then it's an ideology. But like, you know, religious, like the market is the goddess of liberalism, so to say. So how can we sort of get ourselves together, use principles like Ubuntu or whatever, to really have a source, to develop a source that can us help to fight for our emancipation?
Well, first of all, I just want to say this, that you touched on something which is very important. See, as I mentioned earlier, many scholars of religion, whether they're from the West or what, have been able to actually give a proper definition or to agree on a definition of what is religion. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned, non-Western societies never describe themselves. People didn't speak of religion because what we refer to as religion was all part of their daily, everyday life. It was all part of their life. The issue of religion came in when the European started challenging the authority of the church, the ecclesiastical authorities, and they wanted to separate the church from the state. So they say, well, look, you know, religion, the things that of God is God, that's of God, religion, and the state should be secular. But in the non-European tradition and African tradition, there was no separation. Everything was intertwined. So there wasn't a state and church, secular and profane. Everything was interconnected and seen in a holistic way. That's the African tradition. African tradition was never linear or one-dimensional or reductionist. That reductionism is a product of the so-called European Enlightenment, European philosophy, very reductionist. And that is what they do. They, in addressing the human person, they focus on one dimension or the other. That's what they do. Now, the religions, when I mentioned earlier about those dogmatism or what there's dogmatism and orthodoxy. And I've always been opposed to orthodoxy as such, so-called orthodoxy, because it's a cop-out. It's a way of orthodox. When you challenge orthodoxy, they say, well, this is the tenets, and you don't go against it. But what those people fail to realize is that in every given period, all theologies are contextual, and theologies are not neutral, right? Theologies are not neutral because those who seek to interpret the word, whether it's revealed or the rituals, do it within a given context, and they have an understanding, a view of the world. So those theologies are ideological, and they're driven by ideology and politics. And you see it. What we are seeing in West Africa, in Africa, where you see these groups, these heretical groups mushrooming to create chaos, they're sources of that. Boko Haram, when you look at the weaponry they have, the vehicles, you look at the different groups across, where did they get all of this from? Somebody has to be financing them. And a lot of their finance, there's a fight for Africa. Africa is being recolonized right before our eyes, not just by those who were there by the West, but we are seeing new players in Africa, Turkey, Qatar, United Arab Emirates. And I am quite convinced, based on my research, what I've been writing for a long time, that Qatar is a player or one of the finances behind some of these heretical groups. It's not about the religion, it's about establishing their hegemony in Africa. It's all about control of African resources and so. And this is one of the reasons I want to get back, before I get to the last question that you raised about addressing this sort of struggle. You know, this is why many of the Arab leaders hated Brother Gaddafi, because he said something. He said it doesn't matter whether you're a Muslim or a Christian or you follow the Yoruba tradition. He said, whichever one you follow, make sure you be true to it. Be true to it, because this will guide you in your struggle. He said, the idea is not to convert everybody to Islam or this one convert. He said, if you're a Muslim, be a true Muslim. If you're a true Christian, be a true Christian to the tenets of what Christ preached, and so on, as well as the traditional. That is what he spoke of. And they hated him for that, because he was never, he challenged that. And there's an excellent book written by Mahmoud Ayoub on the religious thought of Muammar Gaddafi, because that is why many of those dogmatic Muslims in Saudi Arabia and many parts of the Arab world, the so-called fundamentalists, they saw Gaddafi as, to them, Gaddafi was a heretic, but Gaddafi was that they're the real heretics. Because he went to them. He said, he was the first one to apologize. He said, you people, he told Arab leaders, he said, you people, at the summit of Africa, you people treat Africans today in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE the same way you were treated them when they were being captured. And they didn't like it. So, and those countries that I mentioned were at the heart of the overthrow of the Libyan Jamahiriya, because their interest in Africa, they see themselves as above the African. Their interest in Africa is to plunder Africa. They're not in there, those places don't advocate the unity and liberation of Africa. They're not, they want to plunder Africa. That's what they're about. But so we have to know them for what they are. And they are the groups, they are the countries, and regimes that are financing these heretical groups. And the French know it, and the Americans are well aware of it. They know this. Good. They're very selective on the issue of fighting terrorism. Now, we know as Pan-Africanists, we know as Africans who are fighting for our liberation, the tools. We have to see that many of our people are flocking the church. Our people are a spiritual people. And when anyone go to preach about the word of God to our people, or talk about religion to our people listen. But there are a lot of wolves in sheep clothing, and we have to expose them. And we have to expose them by reclaiming the ground, by challenging them on their own turf. We have to expose those. There are churches in Nigeria. There are thousands of churches, assemblies of God, thousands of evangelical churches that are getting huge funding from the likes of Pat Robertson in the United States, right? Who supported the Renamo, who supported financially Renamo and UNITA under Jonas Savimbi at the time. And you have all of these pastors who are acquiring tremendous wealth and live in luxury. And Nkrumah was right. Nkrumah was addressed the issue when he said that everywhere we see where there's tremendous poverty, we see the flourishing and mushrooming of churches. And that is not a coincidence. That is structural. That is structural. And we have to, that must be addressed, but we're not going to resolve it by just tossing out everything. So what we have to do is in parts of, like the Black Community Coalition for Justice and Self-Defense, and all the different groups, whether it's OVP here, all the Pan-African groups, all of those who are holding down our little corner space and struggle, we will have to include this in part of our platform, part of our programs, part of our educational program, part of our outreach, as part of our educational program, so to get our people to see and to understand the difference, and to see our religions as really emancipatory, as liberatory, rather than barriers or obstacles to emancipation.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would give the word to Sister Oloruntoyin.
Yeah. Thank you so much, brother, for this knowledge which you have shared. it was very important again to me that you stressed that actually the question of religion is not something that should separate us in our struggle for liberation.
Correct.
And also stressing that that actually the root of these religions, the origins, are actually African.
Yes.
And we as a spiritual people have to introduce this into all that we do. It is actually a spiritual responsibility to fight for liberation.
Correct.
Thank you so much.
Correct.
We have listened to the lecture and we will now go into the discussion part, in which we would like to do that. We will not do that on camera. We thank again all those who have been watching live. It's unfortunate that we had to postpone the first lecture, which was to have taken place. But still, we thank everyone who is here. We thank everyone who is watching online. And yes, thank you for being here. We take a 5-minute break and we come back into the discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and those of our Black members who want to join the discussion, the link is in the Facebook, still available. So
Yes.
join if you want to discuss.
Exactly.
See you.
See you then.